Welcome to the NCDWI Guy podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI Guy, Jake Minick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 128 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, we are going to talk about something that may be painful, may bring out some emotions. You might cry after this one, probably not. But we're going to talk about painful losses in the courtroom and what to do after you experience a loss in the courtroom. As defense attorneys, as DWI lawyers, we have our backs up against the wall in a lot of cases. Sometimes you've got a great issue for trial, but sometimes you have to put up a case up for trial that is going to be a difficult case to win. Your back might be up against the wall, and if you are a good DWI lawyer, you're going to lose a lot of cases. And what I mean by that, and I've said this several times on the podcast, was several years back, I heard at a DWI CLE down in Georgia, an attorney say, "You're not a real DWI lawyer until you've lost 10 in a row." Not a real DWI lawyer until you've lost 10 in a row. Why is that? Because a real DWI attorney takes difficult cases to trial. A real defense attorney takes difficult issues to trial. So today we're going to talk about what to do when you get handed a loss, really whether that is a actual, guilty verdict loss handed down by a judge or a jury, or kind of a worse than expected outcome in sentencing. I had a case today that did not go as I was expecting from a sentencing standpoint. Definitely feels like a punch in the gut for me and was extremely disturbing to my client. And we've all experienced this. We've all had situations where we didn't feel like justice was getting done in the courtroom. And so how do you respond? How do you follow up to that loss? What I want to do is just kind of walk through a couple of things that I think are good follow-ups to a situation where you have experienced a loss, again, whether that's a sentencing loss or an actual trial loss in the courtroom. Big picture, one thing that anybody that's ever played defensive back or just watches football has probably heard this expression that defensive backs have to have a short-term memory. Well, why is that? Why does a defensive back have to have a short-term memory? Because they are typically the player that is getting beaten on some explosive 80-yard touchdown pass by the opposing team, right? The person that was supposed to be covering this particular wide receiver, tight end, whatever it might be, blows their coverage, isn't fast enough, whatever it might be, does not get the job done, and gives up a huge play, potentially a touchdown, potentially points to the other team as a result of their missed play. And the unfortunate thing about sports, and certainly this applies in the courtroom as well, is you got to go back out there. You got to stand back up, brush yourself off, and go back out there to the next play. And the reason why it's important for a defensive back to have a short-term memory is because you can't dwell on that mistake of the past, because if you do too long, then you're likely, first of all, not concentrating on the play, but you're almost more likely to make the same mistake again. You're going to be playing out of fear as opposed to out of the normal way that you'd play the game. So you don't want to change your dynamic. Adjust, yes, but you don't want to change your killer mentality, your defensive scheme, so to speak, because of one blown opportunity. So that short-term memory, I think, is important for us to remember as defense lawyers. It's something that we've got to become resilient and basically shake off the loss and get ready to stand up the next time for trial, go to bat for our client at the next sentencing hearing, because it's our job and we can't adequately represent our clients if we don't dust ourselves off, stand back up, and fight the next case. So big picture, you want to have that fighter's mentality. You want to have that short-term memory by not letting that loss become too much a part of your mental space, by not dwelling too much on that loss. However, I wanted to go through kind of 4 things that I do think are appropriate whenever you experience a loss in terms of a worse sentencing outcome or in terms of an actual guilty verdict in trial or loss on a motion to dismiss or suppress or whatever it might be. So number 1 is make sure that you kind of give even more attention to your client, right? This is really, at the end of the day, their loss that they have just experienced. And so, don't go into any type of kind of standoffish or, I'm finished with my job and it stinks, but, I'm kind of just checking out now because the game is over at this point. Now is really your time to step up for your client and their time of need. So if there's anything that can be done to amend the outcome, change the outcome, if there's anything that can be done to mitigate the damage that is done by that loss, if there's just some much needed hand holding that has to occur in terms of creative thinking about how having to deal with this unexpected outcome, that needs to be front and center. That needs to be the first thing that you do, is to allow for an adjustment. And I think it's important that if your client has an outcome that they're not expecting, whether their expectation is realistic or unrealistic, if they are expecting something different to have gone down in the courtroom and it goes worse than expected, there is an element of shock that comes from that. That's the problem with being unprepared and why it's so difficult as a defense attorney to have a unexpected or an unanticipated outcome, because it really can change the planning and the strategic thought process going into a court date. So you need to make sure that you give your client some time to digest that outcome and schedule some sort of a follow-up so that they can actually process what needs to occur next and what the next steps are that need to get taken. So have really good communication with your client. That is, to me, extremely, extremely important. Ultimately, again, they're the ones that have to deal with the brunt of whatever kind of sideways verdict or sentence has come their way. And so you need to be there for them in that time of need. You need to kind of step up your game, so to speak, in terms of having their back, communicating effectively, figuring out what the next plan of attack, what the next move is going to be. You need to stand by your client in that moment and not shrivel away, particularly out of fear that you're going to get blamed for something, right? Like that this is, somehow going to come back on you. You need to step up in that time of need and make sure that you're getting questions answered and a thoughtful plan for moving forward with the case. So that is the number 1 priority. The next 3 things that I'm going to talk about are more, how can we kind of eliminate this from happening again in the future? So number 2, ask for feedback. Okay. So this requires a lot of humility, but ask for feedback. Ask the judge involved on the case. Ask the attorney, the DA that's involved on the case, the prosecutor involved on the case. Ask other defense lawyers in the courtroom. Ask the clerk. Ask the bailiff. Ask anybody who has just observed what's gone down in the courtroom what they could have done differently. Ask the judge, what in the future, what could my client have done to, avoided that sentencing outcome? Or Judge, would you mind sharing your reasoning about this particular, circumstance, this particular verdict that you just rendered, this particular sentence. Ask the judge for feedback so that, again, you can kind of at least have a sense of what was going on. Maybe you can find a way to avoid that similar outcome in the future. Prosecutor, the same deal. They've just witnessed this firsthand. Maybe they're advocating for a certain position. And so, hey, what do you think I could have done to improve? Where do you think I missed anything? It's always helpful. I think it always elevates the person you're asking this, regardless of the feedback that you're getting. That, I think you're kind of building a rapport with the person that you're asking that of, because you automatically put them in a position of esteem, of a mentor. So you want to ask other people that have observed whatever has just gone down in the courtroom for their feedback, and then implement that feedback. You want to make sure that if you have put yourself in an avoidable situation, that you don't get into that same situation again in the future. So just make sure that you use that as an opportunity to get to use your sounding boards that are in the courtroom witnessing this. Number 3, reflect on what has just happened. And again, so instead of we just talked about having this short-term memory, not dwelling on things too much. So it doesn't mean beat yourself up. It doesn't mean punch yourself in the face and mutter things under your breath. And as you're driving down the road, and you think about what happened to the courtroom earlier, you have to like scream it out of your head as you're driving, because you don't want to look like a maniac going down the roadway. You don't want your wife to hear you in the shower, trying to scream out of your mind the loss that you experienced in the courtroom. So it doesn't mean dwell on that situation. What I mean when I say reflect is think about what could have gone different. Think about ways that you could use that loss, that failure, to improve your representation in the future. Make sure that you're not missing anything. One thing that we do at our office is we have a Google chat where we have a channel called Case Assessments. And this is an opportunity for us as a firm to share our wins. Yes, we share when we have a great outcome in the courtroom. We share when we have a really great sentencing outcome in the courtroom with one another. But we also share our losses. What sentence went sideways, what verdict was rendered that we weren't expecting, asking, somewhat for feedback on that, but just also putting out there, here's what happened. And, here's maybe why I thought that it happened. These case assessments, these kind of reflections of the good and the bad, I think are very powerful tools for improvement. And ultimately, we learn way more from our failures than from our successes. So whatever there is to be gleaned by the rest of the firm when we share those successes, I think pales in comparison to what we learn as a firm. But again, speaking to the audience, as individuals, what we learn from our failures. And so having a time where we actually sit down, again, for us, write that out, actually type out what happened with a particular case, putting your thoughts to paper, I really think can help identify the circumstances that were going on, some area for improvement, have a reflection of what happened in the courtroom. Again, not dwelling on it in some negative way, but really just trying to sit down and say, without all the kind of negative emotion, what just happened in the courtroom? What, how can I improve? What could I have done differently? Having that opportunity to take a step back and think about ways to improve is huge. Don't miss the opportunity to learn from your failures. Don't just push them off. We're so used to on social media seeing everybody's victories, right? Everybody posts their wins. Everybody posts when they go out to eat. Everybody posts, some cool concert that they went to, or that they're at this, Panthers game or whatever whatever it might be. But you don't see people just sharing their mistakes and their failures publicly very often. It looks like everybody else is just living the glamorous life, and we know that's not true. So don't lie to yourself. Don't miss this opportunity for growth that is a failure, because you really can capitalize on your failures and make some major steps forward for future cases. Last and final thought number 4 is share. Share this with other people. Again, we do this through the Google chat. That's how we share our kind of individual reflections. But share it with somebody. Share it with, and again, this doesn't have to be, and probably is less likely to be, somebody that's just standing in the courtroom at the time. Sit down with one of your friends in the defense bar. Sit down and talk with your spouse about this. Sit down and talk with somebody that is, at your office, your assistant or another attorney that you share office space with, whatever it might be, and just say, hey, this happened in the courtroom. Dang, it really messed with me. Doesn't have to be oh, woe is me. This is not a pity party session. But I think it is healthy to share a failing with another person, because by sharing that, you kind of open yourself up. By having that humble attitude, you're opening yourself up for advice. And maybe you just kind of have somebody else that's like, dang, that's rough. That's a rough outcome. It just stinks for your client, stinks for you. Maybe kind of it just allows for that opportunity to be able to share that loss and healthily get that out of the internal, kind of internal drama that's going on in your head, just to get that out. But more importantly, you also, again, may get some good feedback from this spouse, partner, assistant, whoever it is that you kind of share this with. And again, whether it's maybe you should have presented it differently, or, did you know about this case, or, what if you had advised your client of this in the this opportunity that exists out there, whatever it might be, you are likely going to get some good feedback on that front. So, opening yourself up to those opportunities for advice and feedback is I think incredibly powerful. So again, when you have a loss, and for those of us in the defense world, and again, for us DWI trial lawyers, they're going to come fast and furious for most of us, and that's okay. We need to have that freedom fighter mentality of bouncing back. We need to learn. We need to grow from our losses. We need to make sure our representation is elevated in the future, so that we can avoid any pitfalls that we come upon in the future. Hope this has been helpful to you, and I look forward to speaking with you again next time. If you found the information in this podcast to be valuable, I simply ask that you pay it forward and share this podcast with another member of the legal community. Also, if you would leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you are listening on, I would greatly appreciate it.